The roar of 20 Harley-Davidson motorcycles echoed through the quiet streets of a small Texas town on a Saturday afternoon. The sound was unmistakable, the kind that made windows rattle and heads turn. These weren't just any bikers. They were members of the Iron Brotherhood, a motorcycle club known across the state for their leather vests, their fierce loyalty to each other, and their intimidating presence that made most people cross to the other side of the street. Jake Reaper, Morrison led the pack, his graying beard catching the wind as his bike thundered down Main Street. At 52, Jake had been riding with the Brotherhood for 30 years. His leather vest was covered in patches telling stories of roads traveled, brothers lost, and a life lived outside society's comfortable boundaries. To most people, Jake looked like trouble, someone to avoid, someone dangerous. But what most people didn't know about Jake Morrison was that he'd spent the last 15 years volunteering at children's hospitals, that he'd raised his daughter alone after his wife died, and that beneath the intimidating exterior was a man who understood what it meant to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Brotherhood was riding through town on their way to a charity event, a toy drive for foster children that they organized every year. 20 big men on roaring motorcycles, carrying boxes of donated toys strapped to their bikes, heading to a community center where kids who'd been forgotten by the world waited for someone to remember them. They'd just stopped at a red light on the edge of town when Jake heard it, a sound that cut through the rumble of engines and made his blood run cold. A child screaming. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, running down the sidewalk, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking with terror and desperation. Help! Please help. They're beating my mama. They're beating my mama. Jake killed his engine immediately. Behind him, 19 other engines went silent as the Brotherhood watched this little girl run toward them, her pink dress torn, her knees scraped, her face twisted in anguish that no child should ever have to feel. She ran straight to Jake's motorcycle, grabbing onto his leather vest with small hands that shook violently. Her brown eyes were wide with fear, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. She could barely breathe, the words tumbling out between sobs. Please, please, you have to help. They're hurting her. They're going to kill her. Please. Jake looked down at this terrified child, and something in his chest tightened. He saw his own daughter at that age, saw every vulnerable child he'd ever tried to protect. He swung off his bike and knelt down to the girl's level, his rough hands gentle as he took her trembling shoulders. Where? Jake asked, his voice calm despite the rage building inside him. Where is your mama? The girl pointed back toward a residential street 2 blocks away. The blue house. The man is hurting her. He hurt me too. I ran away, but Mama couldn't run. Please. Jake looked up at his brothers. Bull, his second in command, was already on his phone calling 911. Snake and Chains had started their bikes again. The rest of the Brotherhood sat ready, their faces hard, their eyes cold. Whatever was happening in that blue house was about to end. Stay with her. Jake told Mary, one of the few female members of the club, who'd ridden up beside them. Mary was a former Army medic, tough as nails, with a soft spot for kids. She immediately pulled the little girl close, wrapping her in a protective embrace. Jake remounted his bike. The entire Brotherhood followed his lead. 20 motorcycles roared back to life, and Jake led them down the street the little girl had pointed to, the sound of their engines like rolling thunder, announcing that justice was coming, and it wore leather vests and rode steel horses. The blue house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, its lawn overgrown, its paint peeling. It looked like every other house on the street. Unremarkable. The kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and pretended not to hear what they heard. But as the Brotherhood pulled up, filling the entire street with their bikes, they could hear what was happening inside. Shouting, a woman crying, the sound of something breaking, the unmistakable sound of violence. Jake was off his bike before it fully stopped, moving toward the front door with the kind of purpose that had been honed by decades of standing up to bullies. The rest of the Brotherhood fanned out around the house, blocking any escape routes, their presence intimidating and absolute. Jake didn't knock. He tried the door. Locked. He stepped back and kicked it with his boot, the door frame splintering under force. The door flew open and Jake stepped inside, followed immediately by Bull in chains. The scene inside made Jake's blood boil. A woman, maybe 35, lay on the floor, her face bruised and bleeding, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Standing over her was a man in his 40s, drunk or high or both, his fist raised for another blow. The living room was destroyed, furniture overturned, pictures smashed, evidence of violence that had been building for who knows how long. The man spun around when the door crashed open, his eyes going wide as he saw Jake and the Brotherhood filling his doorway. For a moment, everyone froze, the tableau of violence interrupted by the arrival of something the abuser hadn't expected. "Who the hell are you?" the man slurred, tried to sound tough but his voice wavering. Jake didn't answer with words. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed the man by the front of his shirt, lifting him off his feet with a strength that belied his age. The man's bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by the fear of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "You like hitting women?" Jake's voice was quiet, deadly calm. "You like beating on someone who can't fight back? You like terrorizing children?" The man stammered, tried to make excuses, but Jake wasn't interested. He dragged him to the door and threw him outside, where the rest of the Brotherhood waited. 10 bikers immediately surrounded him, their presence ensuring he wasn't going anywhere. Jake turned back to the woman on the floor. She was conscious but dazed, trying to sit up, her eyes filled with fear and shame and confusion. Bull was already on his phone with 911 dispatch again, updating them on what they'd found. Chains had found a blanket and was bringing it over. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice gentle now, all the rage controlled and channeled. "You're safe now. An ambulance is coming. Your daughter is safe too. She's with one of our crew members outside. Nobody is going to hurt you anymore." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My baby. Is she okay? Did he hurt her?" "She's scared, but she's okay," Jake assured her. "She's brave. She ran for help. She saved you." Jake knelt beside the woman, careful not to touch her broken arm, and waited with her until the ambulance arrived. He'd seen violence before, had been part of stopping it more times than he could count. But it never got easier, seeing what people could do to each other, especially to those they were supposed to love and protect. Sirens filled the air. 2 ambulances arrived, followed by 3 police cars. Paramedics rushed in to treat the woman, whose name they learned was Sarah. Police officers took the abuser into custody, placing him in handcuffs while he shouted threats and excuses that nobody listened to. Outside, the little girl sat on Mary's motorcycle, wrapped in Mary's leather jacket, which was far too big for her but seemed to make her feel safe. When Sarah was brought out on a stretcher, the girl scrambled down and ran to her mother's side, grabbing her uninjured hand. "Mama, the bikers helped. Just like you said someone would. The bikers saved us." Sarah looked up at Jake, who stood nearby, and mouthed the words, "Thank you," before the ambulance doors closed and took her and her daughter to the hospital. The police took statements from the Brotherhood. The lead officer, a man named Rodriguez, who'd been on the force for 20 years, shook Jake's hand. "You did good today," Rodriguez said. "We've been called to this house before, but she always refused to press charges. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time she'll finally be free of him." Jake nodded, but he knew the statistics. He knew how often victims went back to their abusers, how the system failed to protect them, how the cycle continued. But at least today, at least in this moment, Sarah and her daughter were safe. The Brotherhood didn't make it to the charity event that day. They spent the afternoon at the police station giving statements, making sure everything was documented, making sure the abuser would face real consequences this time. But Jake couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and her daughter, about the little girl who'd been brave enough to run for help, who'd looked at 20 scary bikers and seen salvation instead of danger, about the mother who'd endured who knows how much abuse try and protect her child. That evening, Jake made a decision. He called a meeting at the Brotherhood's clubhouse, a building on the outskirts of town that served as their headquarters, their gathering place, their sanctuary. The 20 members sat around a long wooden table, beers in hand, their leather vests marking them as brothers bound by more than blood. Jake stood at the head of the table, his expression serious. "We all saw what happened today." Jake began. "We all heard that little girl crying for help. We all saw what that bastard did to her mother. And I've been thinking about all the other Sarahs out there, all the other little girls, all the people trapped in situations like that with nobody to help them." He paused, looking around the table at faces scarred by life, by choices, by roads traveled. These men had their own demons, their own past mistakes. But they also had loyalty, courage, and a code that valued protecting the weak above all else. "I want to start something," Jake continued. "I want the Brotherhood to be known for more than just riding and charity toy drives. I want us to be the people that little girl saw today. The ones who help when nobody else will. The ones who stand between victims and their abusers. I want to organize ride-alongs for women fleeing domestic violence. Safe houses. Support networks. Real help, not just showing up once and disappearing." Bull spoke up first. "I'm in. My sister died because of domestic violence. Nobody helped her. Nobody stopped him. If we could be the ones who stop the next bastard, count me in." One by one, the Brotherhood members voiced their agreement. These rough men, who society often judged by appearance, who were dismissed as troublemakers and outlaws, committed themselves to something bigger than themselves. They would become guardians, protectors, the unexpected heroes who showed up when heroes were needed. Over the following days, Jake visited Sarah in the hospital. Her arm would heal. Her physical injuries would fade. The emotional scars would take longer, but she was alive and her daughter was alive, and that was what mattered. "Why?" Sarah asked Jake during one visit. "Why did you help us? You don't know us. You could have just called the police and kept riding." Jake thought about how to answer. He thought about his own daughter, grown now with kids of her own. He thought about all the times he'd seen violence and done nothing, because it wasn't his business. He thought about the man he'd been and the man he wanted to be. "Because your daughter asked us to," Jake said simply. "She ran to us crying for help. And when a child asks for help, you don't turn away. You don't make excuses. You help. That's what decent people do." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She was so scared of you at first. All the leather and the tattoos and the motorcycles. But she was more scared of leaving me with him. She said she'd rather ask scary bikers for help than let him kill me. She was braver than I've been in 5 years. "You were brave, too," Jake said. "Surviving is brave. Enduring is brave. And leaving is the bravest thing of all. You're going to be okay now. Both of you." Sarah reached out and squeezed Jake's hand. "I want to help. When I get out of here, when I'm healed, I want to help other women like me. Will you let me? Will you let me be part of whatever you're building?" Jake smiled. "We'd be honored." 6 months later, the Iron Brotherhood had transformed from just a motorcycle club into something more. They'd partnered with local domestic violence shelters, created a rapid response network for women fleeing dangerous situations, and established a safe house funded by their charity rides and community donations. Sarah had become the face of the program, sharing her story, helping other victims find the courage to leave, to seek help, to believe that life could be different. Her daughter, whose name was Emma, had started therapy and was beginning to smile again, to be a child again, to trust that the world could be safe. The Brotherhood organized regular freedom rides, where they'd escort women and children from dangerous homes to safe locations, their intimidating presence ensuring no abusers try to follow or interfere. Local police began working directly with them, recognizing that sometimes unofficial help was the most effective help. Jake stood outside the safe house on a warm evening, watching Emma play in the yard with other children who'd been rescued from similar situations. Sarah came out to stand beside him, her arm healed, her face no longer showing the physical evidence of abuse, though Jake knew the invisible scars would take longer to fade. "You changed our lives," Sarah said. "Emma talks about you all the time. She calls you her guardian angel biker." Jake chuckled. Never been called an angel before. Usually get called something else. Sarah smiled, then grew serious. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really stop that day? I know you said it's because Emma asked, but I feel like there's more to it." Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma laugh as she played. Finally, he spoke. "When I was 8 years old, my father beat my mother. I remember hiding in my room, hearing her cry, feeling helpless. One day, my mother took me and we ran. We had nothing. No money, no plan, just desperation. We ended up at a shelter, and there was this woman there, a volunteer, who helped us. She helped my mother find a job, find an apartment, start over. That woman saved us." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd be that person for someone else. I'd be the one who stopped the violence, who helped people escape, who made sure kids like Emma didn't have to grow up in fear like I did. When Emma ran to us crying, I saw myself, and I knew I couldn't let her down." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you for remembering, for caring, for being exactly who we needed exactly when we needed it." That evening, as the Brotherhood gathered for their weekly meeting, Jake looked around at his brothers with pride. They'd started something important, something that would outlast them, something that gave their lives meaning beyond just riding in freedom. Bull raised his beer in a toast. To Emma, for being brave enough to ask for help from scary bikers. The Brotherhood raised their drinks. To Emma, Jake added one more toast. And to every person who's ever been too afraid to ask for help, who's ever felt trapped, who's ever thought nobody would care. We care. We're here. And we're not going anywhere. As the sun set over the Texas plains and the motorcycles lined up outside the clubhouse gleamed in the fading light, the Iron Brotherhood had become something unexpected. Not outlaws or rebels or troublemakers, but protectors, guardians. Proof that heroes don't always wear capes or badges. That sometimes they wear leather vests and ride motorcycles and show up exactly when they're needed most. Emma's question had changed everything. A terrified little girl's desperate cry for help had transformed a motorcycle club into a lifeline for the vulnerable. And in helping others, the Brotherhood had found something they'd been searching for all along: purpose, meaning, and the knowledge that who they were mattered not because of how intimidating they looked, but because of what they did when someone needed them. 1 year after that fateful day, the Brotherhood held their annual charity toy drive. Emma, now 8 and thriving, stood on stage beside Jake, helping to hand out presents to foster children. When it was over and the crowd had dispersed, Emma looked up at Jake with those same brown eyes that had once been filled with terror, but now sparkled with hope. "Uncle Jake," she said. She started calling him that months ago. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything, kiddo." "I used to think bikers were scary, but now I know that sometimes the scariest looking people are actually the safest people, because they're not afraid to help. They're not afraid to do what's right even when it's hard." Jake knelt down to Emma's level, his eyes misty. "You taught us that, Emma. You taught us that being brave means asking for help when you need it. And you reminded us that we have the power to make a difference. You saved your mama that day, but you saved us too." Emma hugged him tight, and Jake held this little girl who'd changed everything, thinking about the ripple effects of kindness, about how one desperate moment could lead to transformation, about how sometimes the people we help end up helping us more than we could ever help them. Sarah watched from nearby, tears of gratitude streaming down her face, knowing that the worst day of her life had led to a new beginning, that the moment her daughter ran to those bikers crying for help had been the moment everything changed, not just for them, but for hundreds of other families who've been helped by the Brotherhood's program. As the sun set and the Brotherhood prepared to ride home, their motorcycles gleaming in the golden light, Jake thought about legacy. not about money or fame or recognition, but about the knowledge that when a child cried for help, he'd answered, that when violence threatened, he'd stood against it, that when the world needed heroes, he and his brothers had been there, leather vests and all. Sometimes, the most unexpected people become exactly who the world needs them to be. Sometimes, judging by appearance means missing the warriors hiding behind intimidating exteriors. And sometimes a little girl's desperate cry for help becomes a catalyst for change that reaches far beyond what anyone could have imagined, proving that courage comes in many forms, and that real strength is measured not by who we can overpower, but by who we're willing to protect. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. It helps us share more beautiful stories like this one. Kindly drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I like to know what part of the world engages with my story. Oh, also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel Deep Cut Stories for more emotional stories about love, kindness, and fate that'll touch your heart deeply. Thank you for watching.